Hi, this is Keith from White Rose Canoe, and I'm pretty clearly not at the shop right now. What happened was when we started the gather on the 16th, I failed to start the recording for the intro. So I thought I'd stick that on now. So welcome to the gather on the 16th of February about tripping in Canada's Little North. What we're going to cover today are two topics. First, Bill Seeley, who's got over 40 years in the bush in and around Keewaydin and the Temagami camp system, and who became one of their Hudson Bay Guides. We'll be talking about traveling the traditional ways using traditional techniques. When Bill's done, we're going to turn it over to John Berger, who is going to talk about traveling safe. Sorry about that. It starts with the planning. And John spent over 64 years exploring and documenting his trip through the Canadian North. He co-authored Canoe Atlas of the Little North and is also an experienced sketch artist. So you'll see a little bit of that as well. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Okay. So we're going to start with Bill. So Bill, if you want to take it away.
All right. Let's see if this all works. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
And can you see the slideshow? That's good, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, the first thing I want to do is to say thanks for Keith for inviting me to do this. And also thanks for Keith putting me on a panel with John Berger. I feel like I've been chasing his shadows for quite some time. John and I both came up cutting our teeth paddling in the Temagami wilderness area. And I have to be honest, when I wanted to know where to go on some of the trips I'll talk about in the next 20 minutes or so, one of the first places I would go was I would ask John and see if John had been there, and I would follow John and his sketches down the river. So I'm indebted to John for some of the adventures that I had, and I'm really delighted to be on a panel with him. So anyway, this is a picture of, we used to call it Spyford Lake. In the distance under the rising sun is Spirit Rock. I think it's Anishinaabe name is Shishkong Lake. John probably knows the full length name of the lake. He might tell you later. But this is a picture of the Temagami wilderness where I started paddling in 1979 as a 12-year-old, and where I've gone back to work for Keewaydin to take the young kids out now that I guess my back has gotten a little sore than it used to be. So I thought there's going to be a bio that would explain these pictures. These are just pictures of some of the places and adventures that I've had over time. Originally, I was tasked to talk to you a little bit about traditional ways of travel. In the upper left, we have, I'm carrying a Duluth pack. I bet most of you are familiar with a Duluth pack with a tump strap across the top of my head. In the lower left, you can see I'm wearing the traditional barn boot that I know you probably all wear, knee-high rubber boots when you paddle in the woods. I see nobody laughing, so probably nobody does anymore. I don't know about you guys. I really don't like to have wet feet, so my traditional shoe is the knee-high barn boot. Actually, we started wearing these at Keewaydin in part because we found the Cree would wear them when they were out hunting, when we saw them in the woods, which was kind of curious. I don't know if you can see, it's a cedar canvas canoe. I always travel with cedar canvas canoes. I do have a Royal X canoe I've taken out once or twice, but most of the time when I'm in the woods, I'm in a cedar canvas canoe. The tump straps across the top of my head. I don't know if you can see that I'm using my axe to hold the bow down. I don't know how many of you do that. I like to balance the axe over the bow thwart. It gives me a little leverage to move the canoe around as I move around trees and the rest. And I don't know if you can see what's swinging on the left, but that's a tin cup. We don't carry tin cups anymore, but that's a tin cup tied into the thwart so I don't lose it. It makes a ringing noise like a bell when you're portaging. Maybe some of you are familiar with that old adage. And in the lower left is the next generation, my son, who's now in his 20s, helping me in this particular picture. He's helping me revarnish the canoe one spring. Anyway. And the upper left is a picture of myself with my friend Tim Woods on the Allagash River in late November. We had decided to take a trip down to see if we could learn to manage ice. We forgot our pike, but the ice wasn't so bad, so we did okay. So here's a picture of Keewaydin Camp on Temagami, Ontario, on Lake Temagami in Ontario. I don't know if any of you have been up there paddling. It's a really nice spot. This is from last summer, 2022, when the camp finally reopened after the pandemic. And this is a group of young women returning from a 49-day trip to Lake Temagami on Hudson Bay. Here's some pictures of the Temagami wilderness. And so here in the next 15 minutes or so, I've got a photo dump to show you of some trips that I led as a long trip guide for Keewaydin. I think Keith had it in the bio. These long trips were all in the Hudson Bay watershed. These were young men from the age of 17 to maybe 22. We would have 6 to 8 of them for the summer, myself and my partner in crime, Steve Springate. And these trips would last from 35 to 52 days, depending. There were a couple trips that we took on the Fawn Severn River system. Over here, I'll show you some images from those. There are a couple trips we took on the Rupert River system. The Rupert River was particularly fun, as were the Fawn Severn, because these were old fur trade routes that we were on, and the portages were in the ground. If you were on the right path, when you found the trail, you would find the trail in the ground. It was actually it was kind of like sleuthing your way along. Sometimes it'd be a little bushy, but you could certainly find them. The real adventure that I got to have was to follow John Berger down the Great Whale. I followed John's notes down the Great Whale River. We started at the top of the La Forge 2 Dam Complex and came down. That would have been a 50-day canoe trip. And that trip, we found very little of the path of the Cree until we got down low, but then we found it there. In 2002, I followed the Canadian Geological Survey, the 1888 Series J Canadian Geological Survey notes of AP Lowe's. Maybe John will talk about these later. This particular series in the Canadian Geological Survey was a gigantic resource for finding paths in Quebec, because a gentleman named AP Lowe had headed out and really mapped all the Cree trade routes from the Rupert River north to Great Seal Lake, which is up and about here. And this last bit is that these are places my children have gone. I haven't gotten a chance to go there, but once we opened up the Great Whale River for Keewaydin in the late 1990s, all sorts of new paddling routes opened up between the Great Whale and Umiwak, which is the new way of going. So anyway, a lot of map time, a lot of map noise. I'll show you some pictures. In the spring of 1992, I was called by Keewaydin to ask if I could come fill in for a spot. Someone had been unable to come. I arrived on June 10th and it snowed on June 18th as a sort of good omen for some time in the woods. This is my friend John Lehrman collecting wood, so we could sit around an open fire and try to stay warm for a day or two. But as would have it, summer came about a week later, and Steve and I were able to yoke up the canoes with the old 20 horsepower open boat and bring them down to the landing, which is 12, 16 kilometers down the lake, and head out into the bush to start a series of adventures on the Rupert River that we did over the course of the next 10 years. So the trips that I'll talk about really quickly, again, it'll be a photo dump and I'll try to jump through them as quick as I can. The first one, we headed out to Lake Albanel, just east of Lake Mistassini, and made our way up the Wabasenon River to a place called Lac Baudot, and then jumped over the Haida Land to the East Main River, came down the East Main to the old Hudson Bay post at Nesquesca, which was always our re-outfit site on these trips, because there was a big gravel beach where the plane could come in. This river is not really called the Moon River. There was a boy who sang Moon River all summer long for us, and then we always had a new moon on that stretch, so we ended up calling it the Moon River. I bet you John remembers its Cree name. So we come down this stretch, the Moon River, we called it, which was a Cree Brigade route towards Waskaganish, onto the Rupert, down through the old village of Nemaskow, where we often found Cree who had been relocated to Nemaska up here. Cree would be back here living sort of in traditional ways and trying to revive the town. They'd been moved because the river was going to be dammed and they wanted to put them in a new spot. And then down the lower Rupert. So this is a picture of the first portage out of Lake Albinel. It's actually on the creek a little bit down. This is what the landscape really looks like there. It's boreal forest, black spruce forest. You can see the way we traveled here. We have our bedrolls wrapped tight and in canvas bags and tied together with a tump strap. There's a tent that we would carry with the double packs. We have 2 wannigans in the canoe. Each of those wooden boxes probably weighed between 60 and 100 pounds when full, right before re-outfit. So everybody had a load, had 2 loads. The bowman would get the double pack and the wannigan. The sternman would get the canoe and the wannigan, a canoe and a wannigan. And I don't know if anybody can see, but here's our axe tied in comfortably like a handle, just in case you have to hang on in the stern. The nice part about the trip up the Wabasenon River to the East Main is that you had to jump over the height of land, and some of that was a bushy spot. Some of those spots were a bit bushy. The trail would get a bit lost. This is a picture from a later trip, but it was often the case that we would have to flag our way across a spot where maybe the trail had gotten overgrown, and we were really kind of out in the wilderness there, out in the bush. We're out in the bush everywhere, but the Cree were out on the land. The Cree had hunting and fishing camps, and the trail was deep in the ground. So every once in a while, you'd get to a spot in a height of land where you'd really kind of out there. So this is some of the lads running a rapid. I would guess that this is on the upper Rupert River. This is in 1993. Our route was a little different in 1993. And this is a stretch of portage on that Moon River stretch. There's a campsite under that cliff in the background. And here we can see the traditional way of carrying with a wannigan and a tump strap pulled over the top of your head. I would guess that Andy is carrying a lot of flour in that duffel bag at this point, because we've just had our re-outfit recently. So in 1993, we came over the Lac Albinel portage and we looked across Lake Mistassini. It's about 20 kilometers long across at its widest. Maybe it's 18, 16 there. And we could see that the Wabasenon River was on fire and we'd have to reroute. And as luck would have it, the Cree have a very rustic sports fishing camp right about where that portage takes out. And we were able to find a guide there. There were no guests there, just a couple guides. And this gentleman, whose name I believe was Tommy Voyageur, at least that's what folks told me, he didn't speak a lick of English to me the entire time we were out in the bush together. He spoke Cree. Jumped in this probably, I bet it was a 16-foot Boston Whaler with a 20 horsepower engine, and we headed 63 kilometers down the lake to Mistassini to check on the fire. You can see the fire smoke in the distance. And we had to reroute. Part of rerouting involved this crossing, this compass bearing crossing of the lake, probably about, I guess that was probably a 12-kilometer crossing on a compass bearing. The portage is up in this end. That's where the camp was. The Wabasenon's over here. The mouth of the Rupert is here. So that summer, what we did was we re-outfitted, went down to Baie de Post. The village is down here at the end of the lake. I called into camp. Calling into camp in those days involved calling the local float plane base, and the float plane base would get on the CB radio and see if they could rouse camp. Usually it took a couple hours to find somebody in the office at camp to respond. And then our telephone call would be a game of telephone where I would speak to the people at the base and they would relay the message, and then the message would come back and the people at the base would speak to me on the phone. So it took us a couple hours to get this set up. And we rerouted and ran the upper Rupert and took the another brigade route up towards Nishwawbe-Aski. And that was actually kind of nice because that route really was the historical route from Baie de Post down the Rupert up through Nishwawbe-Aski. So we were traveling in these sort of traditional paths as we went along. And what was sort of neat about this is when you got north of Lac Baudot, you were out in the bush. On the brigade route north to Nishwawbe-Aski, straight north on the upper Rupert River through Willet Lake, if any of you are familiar with any of these spots, the campsites weren't used that much, but the campsites were still there. And so I remember this one we could find because from the other side of the lake coming across, you could see this cleared space with these two very clearly parallel trees. and you could see the crossbar where people probably would have hung game or fish when they were at the campsite, so that you could see these campsites from a distance, because there would be some evidence that that there was a human hand there, because the lines and the shapes would be a little wrong. And actually, in many of the places, we found old spruce poles for putting up canvas tents. Maybe spruce poles 25 years sitting in the woods. They hadn't been bothered because no one had been through. And I wish I had a picture of that, because that's kind of cool. Anyway, since part of my task was to talk about traveling in traditional ways, here we have one of the lads getting ready to flip a canoe up for a portage. You can't quite see the tumpline there, but you can see the paddles being used to make the carry yoke tied into the bow thwart. What's nice about this case, we don't have too many of these around anymore, is that there's a set of felt shoulder pads there to keep the ridge of the paddle from digging into the top of your collarbone. But those were kind of nice. And here we have somebody getting ready to carry their double packs. This is the site at Nishwawbe-Aski. There are no buildings there. There are no foundations left. There are some clearings, but this is the gravel beach. This is looking north up the East Main River, waiting for the clouds to rise high enough for the plane to get in, which it did. This plane came to bring us our food in 1992, was still flying in 1998. Haven't been back in that part of the world since. I don't know if it's still flying. I would guess that its serial number was probably 20 or so. I can remember getting in with this pilot. He was a young guy. He was kind of new to the bush, and he actually pulled out the manual and set it out in his lap to help him make sure he had the levers and the flaps set right before we took off, which I thought was kind of exciting. But the boy who was flying with me that day didn't think it was quite as exciting. So this is a picture from 1998 when we were up there, and there was some smoke in the air, and I had hitchhiked a ride down the North Road to Temagami just to see if I could figure out where the fires were, and I got the opportunity to fly back, and I get this nice picture of a peat bog in the boreal forest, which I think is pretty cool. Once you get off the beaten path, off the rivers, this is what the landscape looks like. This is a rapids on the Upper Rupert. This is a lot of what the Upper Rupert and the East Main look like. John will attest to that. He'll probably tell you a lot of stories about that landscape. Here we have some trouts that we caught, keeping with the Cree plural, the trouts. We're smoking them on some green alder sticks there. Just the fire looks to me like it's a little hot, but we'd set them across green alder sticks and set some poplar in there, smoke them, and then just flip them over and pick the morsels off the spine. So I talked a little bit about Nemaska. We would come into this village. It was often populated by folks sort of keeping touch with the traditional ways. Here, there's this nice woman was in the sturgeon smoking tent. That's what we have here, is just a pile of smoked sturgeon. They also had a bear. They weren't the bear they kept for themselves, but they did give us a little bit of sturgeon. And I think we got a little moose meat that day. But the real treat on this day was that this gentleman here, Matthew Wapachi, who is a Cree elder from the Nemaska band, asked if he could join us when we crossed the James Bay Highway in 4 days and come down the lower part of the Rupert with us, because his grandfather, he said, had traveled with the brigades, and he liked to get out and sort of revisit the ways. And so we met him at the road, and he spent 4 days with us and gave us a really nice tour, and we had a nice experience in Waskaganish that summer with him. This boy was in his bow. Since everybody's looked so joyful carrying their wannigans, I wanted to give you a picture of what a hot day might be like in the woods. Andrew's got a, I think everybody's name was Andrew that year. Andrew's got a Duluth pack on top of his wannigan there. We were carrying triple loads, I think, that summer for reasons to be explained. One of the great things about having Matthew with us was that when we got to Smoky Hill Rapids, which is the last rapids on the Rupert, and if I recall, is the site where Father Al Bonnell first made contact with the Cree on the Rupert River in the 17th century. It's a traditional whitefish camp. The Cree come up there, I believe, at the end of the summer to fish the whitefish. And Matthew showed us how to cut spruce boughs and put them in these cisterns that are in the wash on the side of the rapid, and use sticks and nets to catch the little baby whitefish as they're kind of running upstream after, I guess they've just hatched at this point. And this was kind of a neat experience with Matthew. Here we are again in black and white. Oh, I'll get that back, promise. Where'd it go? Good. This is the last island on the Rupert. You could just see Waskaganish in the distance in James Bay. And that's what the end of our Rupert trips often were like. I don't know, the world is a different place, I suppose, now, but Steve Springate, my guide and partner, would always stop and roll a cigarette here and have his last cigarette in the bush before he moved on. This is the old Hudson Bay post, which was still there in those days in Waskaganish. So we keep going. And here's some of the old buildings in Waskaganish. All right, I'll run through some stuff a little more quickly because I know we're probably, I only have about 20 minutes to jump through this, so I've got to use most of my time up. So next we'll talk real quickly about the Fawn Severn. The Fawn Severn trip is really, it's quite nice. The Fawn River runs, parallels the Severn River just east of it. It runs clear, it's a trout fishing river. You pick it up out of Big Trout Lake, right in about the dead center of Ontario, is the way I kind of think of it. And then you pick up the Severn. Severn is a big sluggish limestone river. Towards the end, you're on for about 2 days before you get down to the bay. This is a picture of us running that, and about, I guess this is 1994, running the Fawn. That's on the Windigo River at the beginning of the trip. This is a picture of my Hudson Bay trip in 1983. I'm not in that picture. I suppose I might have even taken that picture. This was walleye for dinner and breakfast and lunch, I think. We had quite a take one day. We didn't fish it out. I've been back many times. The fish are still there. I was a little worried about it as I got older, but it looks pretty nice. This is the old Hudson Bay post at Big Trout Lake. Everywhere we went, the old Hudson Bay Company buildings would be there. Until about 1989, it was still the Hudson Bay Company until about 1989, maybe 1992, we still stayed. We would come into town, and the first thing we would do is go to the band office and ask the band permission to visit the village. And once permission had been secured, we would go visit the chief factor of the Hudson Bay Company and ask permission to stay in his lawn, and we'd set up camp in the shadow, usually of the old warehouse. This is a unique feature. It probably doesn't strike those of us from New England as all that unique, but the Fawn River falls off of the Hudson of the Canadian Shield fairly quickly, and so this is one of the rare spots where we had lunch on a rock. It's mostly gravel and limestone as you go down. I don't know if you can all see what this is. These are the canvas tents that we used to stay in. This is from 1983. We don't have to cut those tent poles anymore, which is kind of nice. But in the old days, nobody would burn them because everybody had the canvas tents. So if you left a set of those spruce poles around, everybody would use them again and again and again. This is on the Fawn River. Here we are at Fort Severn. The picture on the left is a family sitting at the top of the bank. It's about a 50-foot bank you have to climb up to get out of the river to get to Fort Severn. The Cree would come and sit on the edge of the bank and kind of giggle at us as we slipped and struggled up the mud bank to try to get to town. On the lower left is a picture of the guide from 1983, Fred Porter, chatting with some of the young Cree kids who had come around to see what we were up to. And the picture on the right is a picture from 1996, 23 years later, from the same spot, except looking upstream as opposed to downstream. In 1983, we hired a gentleman with this 20-foot nor'wester squareback canoe who took us out on the bay. It was quite an adventure. It's not a big canoe to be out on Hudson Bay in. But one thing that was kind of nice is when we reached the mouth of the river, there was a family drying their fish nets. I don't know if they were getting ready to fish or getting ready to come home, but their nets were out drying and they were making tea. And so we stopped and had tea with them. And while we were having tea, one of them made a tamarack goose for us, wrapped up a little tamarack goose. I'm sorry, you probably can't see it. I should have dragged it down. I bet it's up on one of the shelves behind me in the library there. So those were the Fawn Severn trips. The grandest adventure I ever took in the woods, I think, was following John down the Great Whale River. This is, I think, one of my favorite spots on the Great Whale, where John's notes told me that between the 16-meter and 3-meter falls, the current was not all that strong. You could get across the river from the left to the right and take the rest of the portage out on the esker. And it turns out he was quite right. It looked a little daunting from the start, but the current was just enough that you could get across there without too much trouble. Anyway, maybe he'll tell a story about that as time goes on. The Great Whale was a great trip. It starts out at the very top of the very center of the Labrador Peninsula, which would have been under the Laurentian ice shield. The land above Lac Bienville is quite forgiving. If you want to figure out how to make a portage from one lake to another, what you really need to do is find a caribou trail going in the right direction on the compass bearing and follow it. It's not really, doesn't give you too much trouble. There isn't a lot of bushiness on the side of the road. So when you find a rapids, you can just hop up and make your way around them. The landscape is sandy, gravelly, black spruce forest, lots of caribou moss, quite beautiful. When you get to the first gorge, things change a little bit. It gets a little barren. This is looking downstream. The 16-meter falls is right there. This is looking upstream. A.P. Lowe says that the Cree followed a portage route up over this ridge, just tracked along that ridge. We went down through the gorge and followed John, and I'm happy we did it. It's a beautiful paddle down through the gorge, although the current is a little stiff in spots. In later years, on trips that I wasn't on, folks have gone up over the Cree portage route, but there aren't any trees up there. So if there's a wind, the portage is a little tough. I lost myself again. There we go. I'll find it. We can just start here, head our way back. Going this way. Anyway, below that, you come to the second gorge, which opens with this beautiful, waterfall and becomes quite deep. This is the top of the portage route out of the lower part of the second gorge. You can see that Rutson is carrying a quadruple load there, I think, because of his gigantic backpack. Right, so we've climbed a couple hundred feet up and out. We climbed back down at the tail end of the second gorge, and this is where we started seeing signs of Cree. Here's a Cree camp. You can see where the tent ring would have been there. And the banks of the river come up high. We get some cliffs that come along through here. Paddling is really quite beautiful. Here's kind of a lean-to of sorts that we found on the side of the road at a portage around a spot. So John went up and around the Great Bend to see the 200-foot waterfall. We decided to seek out what A.P. Lowe called the Cree portage route across the Great Bend. A.P. Lowe just had a dotted line across terra incognita. So we looked at our maps and tried to figure out what the most likely place for it was. I will say we found a nice route across. It's about a 40-kilometer portage route across the bend, but we followed lakes with English names and French names. We should really have followed the lakes with Cree names, which take you down to the Denise River, which I'll show you a couple pictures of quickly if I don't run out of time too fast. So the portage route's kind of neat. You come up, you spend a night in the forest, and then you come out on this gravel plain. And there are 3 depression lakes that we portaged in and out of. And at the end of the third depression lake, I don't know if you can quite see it, but there's a rise in the distance. We decided that we would get in a line and walk to that rise, which was about 13 kilometers away. It took us the better part of 2 half days. Here's the kids resting on the road. You can kind of see the rise here getting closer. Here we're coming back into the forest in the lower left. We found a pond and decided to camp. And part of the reason we decided to camp is we found some wolf prints there. And we figured that if the wolves were there, it was probably a decent spot for mammals to spend the night. And so we joined them. Their den wasn't anywhere nearby. We didn't really hear them. The next day, things get a little bushier. I guess it's probably 2 days later. We followed a little narrow creek down towards the Dennis River. You can probably figure that this is narrowing to a waterfall. There's a little cascade up here. Here we are at the tail end of the cascade. And what was nice was in that year, the water was such that we could actually run this flume out kind of like skiing through a narrow path in the woods. It was kind of a nice, probably an hour run down to the Dennis River. Here's Steve and one of the kids paddling out below the last falls on the Dennis. This is the last chute on the Great Whale River. There's about a couple 100-yard portage around that. And then there's a mile rapids below it, which is a little bit of an adventure. And here's the coast of the bay at Great Whale. So again, these are traditional routes. If there's time, Keith, I've got just a couple more things to show. We're doing good? Are we okay still? Okay. So in 2002, I decided that I'd go back to Great Whale. I didn't work at Keewaydin at that time. We just, my wife and I had just had our first child. He was about a year old. So I had been spending time at home. But I headed out into the woods with a couple friends from Keewaydin. We took some Keewaydin gear and my canoe. And we headed out for a 12-day trip following the Canadian Geological Survey, over half of the route that would have gone from Shisassabee to Great Whale in the old days. We had some notes from AP Low with us. This is the turbo beaver that flew us in. Here we are on the first night, sitting in the bush. When we got just above Lac Dennis, the route that we had been following that was in the ground and available to see kind of petered out because there'd been a fire. So this is a 2-mile portage. We had to pick our way down across the burn to the headwaters of the Dennis River. The Dennis River actually flows out of some ponds to our right there. It was this for most of the 12 days, although this afternoon, when we got to this lake, the sun came out, and so we decided to stay on that island and enjoy the sun for a minute. This is the sun out. Anyway, this is sort of what the Dennis River trip was like. There's open water, the river is paddleable, but when you come to a spot where you have to kind of get around something, it's usually a pretty long walk. This is the walk back down to the Dennis River. The Cree route is a Cree portage route that skips a gorge on the Dennis River, and this is about a mile portage down to the river. The river's actually cuts down to the left, and we're heading down to the left there. This is the second to last portage on the Great Whale River. You've gone up over a pretty big hill and down and walk around the bottom of this gorge. And here's John on the coast of the river. This is John Lehrman, who you saw pushing the firewood down to the lodge for a fire in the snow there in the earlier slide. Anyway, I don't know. I'd imagine John might say something about this in a minute. This is the volume of the Canadian Geological Survey that we use to find our routes. These are AP Low's field maps. Notice all the terra incognita around the river. We followed these down the Dennis. They turned out to be actually quite nice because the topography of the banks of the river follow AP Low's perspective from sitting in the canoe where he was sketching, as opposed to the satellite map that we get from a topo map. What I didn't get to do, because the gentleman on the trip with me wanted to fly over this stretch and start beyond it, was take the trip from the Canoe River up this little creek to the headwaters of the Dennis River. And this is a bit of AP Low's maps and notes about how you might have gotten through that stretch. And I wanted to see if they were the same 130 years later, which I imagine they were. So since we've been up there on the Great Whale, Keewaydin has used the Great Whale as a highway to do some trips further north. This is a picture my son took of he and his friends paddling up the shore of Hudson Bay between the Goulet, where Richmond Gulf, Lac Tazuac, feeds back out into the bay. They'd spent a night or two on the coast of the bay, making their way to the Inuit village of Moyak, where they flew home from. I suggested that maybe there was a lot of ice underneath the water, and next time they could stay a little farther away. And they told me I was old and cranky, which is probably true.
Okay, Bill,
Anyway, yes,
probably need to close it up.
let's close it up here. The only thing I have left are some pictures of the Attawapaskat. There's a strike of limestone that comes right through there. It's really quite pretty. And then some stuff about gear, which we could talk about later. I always like to show a picture of a canvas tent because, well, you know, when you had to leave that canvas tent, you could just roll right out. So you can't do that anymore. Anyway, thank you, Keith. Thanks for the time. And thank you guys for your patience and listening.
Okay. Any quick questions for Bill before we get John going? Okay, there'll be a longer session once John gets through his bit. So John, if you want to, Bill, if you want to stop sharing your screen.
Yep.
And John, if you want to start sharing yours.
So thank you. And thank you, Bill, for some memories of some tremendous trips, that's for sure. And my story here is different, so I think you'll enjoy it. I'm going to talk about planning a trip and then going on it. And I thank you for the opportunity to tell a canoe trip story, because the next best thing to being on a canoe trip is telling a story about it. And that's what we're going to whip through here. So this is really about planning and how you find out about where to go and how to go, and you'll see how it works. But I start telling myself a story long before I get out on the river, and I never stop telling it, even after I come back. So where do you want to go? And you know, I want to go somewhere where there's a chance that someone's already been there and left some kind of record. So here we've got the 50,000 foot view or higher. Most of the little north is fit into here. It's east and northeast of Lake Winnipeg. The Petit Nord and the Grand Nord is north and west of Lake Winnipeg. The key part about this slide is that the whiter lakes and the gray lines of the rivers, you can paddle on any one of them. I mean, there's a zillion canoe routes here. And not only that, they're all connected. You start down at Lake Nipigon and end up, you know, wherever this is, Fort Severn or maybe it's York Factory, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's totally 100% connected. In fact, you can go everywhere, doesn't matter. Here's a little further east, the same view, east of Lake Nipigon. This is the classic stuff that drains up into James Bay. And the major height of land between the Arctic watershed and the St. Lawrence and so on is down here. And I just put this little box here. This is roughly speaking the Temagami country. It's about 50 by 70 miles. And the literature says there's 2,000 documented kilometers canoe routes in that thing. So I figure it's about 300 Temagami rectangles in the little north. And I was thinking about that 2,000 kilometers. Lake Temagami itself has 3,000 miles of shoreline. So I think they're not right on that one, but there's a lot of places to go. So now, Bill already gave you a quick overview of Temagami, and this was by popular demand, includes some of these things in here. So yeah, you know, hard bedrock and pines and stuff like that, and little tiny places and little creeks and fall cliffs, and I always include one of a house, because if there's one thing about Temagami, it's populated everywhere, starting from the mining and the logging and the lodges and everything else, and the structures are all part of the landscape. This is down on the Matabitchuan River, an absolute gorgeous place. So I'm planning a trip, and here's the sources I use when I am planning a trip. I won't read them because we're going to go through them, and you'll see that there's a plethora of information today available to us. The first set are overviews of the situation. Fur trade canoe routes then and now, that's Eric Morse's classic book. Fur trade used the rivers and lakes and the hills and the streams and everything else to transport the billions and billions of dollars of stuff to the ports and whatnot. But you want to look at it, and I'll tell you where to go. It's terrific. And some of the fur trade routes that I've been on, you could barely get a 16-foot canoe through there. So it wasn't just the canoe to Nord and the ground canoe and all that stuff. Here's a book by two friends of mine, Canoeing North of the Unknown. Karen is broken into regions, and they look at trips that occurred there, big bibliography. It's got some gaps, that's for sure, but nonetheless, I mean, you're looking for a place to go. And here was the website of the WCA, my canoeing club in Ontario and Canada. Wonderful people, wonderful folks. And they've got trip reports in here, spotty, but you know, we're looking for a place to start, and why not? It's a great spot. Put together by a wonderful guy who's dead now, but a wonderful work he did for everybody. So now you kind of figure out where you are, where you want to go. And as Bill pointed out, the next thing are the Department of Mines and the geologic surveys and whatnot. And it's obvious that they, when they were doing that survey in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there weren't any aircraft. And so they paddled the fur trade routes and the other routes. And so the best picture of all the rivers in the central part of the Little North is this McInnes thing, Department of Mines deal volume. And it's absolutely sensational, and it gives you a lot of good stuff. You keep going there. Now, first that you want to look at are the topo maps. The grid of Canada, this is what we're talking about. From the 20s on into the 80s, this grid here was the grid on the right, on the left, was what we had. And there was 16, 1 to 250,000 maps in each of the big quadrangles, and there's blanket coverage in all of Canada. But by the end of the 80s, we start, each of these quads is broken down into 1650 Ks, which is pretty nice for navigating. But the early maps, the early maps that were done have canoe route information on them, which is fantastic. So here's Fort Hope. This is the Albany, Arizona, Kitchewan. You're coming down. You want to go back to the railroad, you go up the Kitchewan River. And there's rapids blocked away, but it does show the portage back here. The old Indian route is right there. So those are invaluable. And if you can get a hold of them, they're wonderful to have. They're wonderful pieces and whatnot. The provinces also produce maps. This one's double the scale, 520,000. District of Thunder Bay, it's got rapids and portages on there. Again, hey, you could go this way, hey, you could go that way. Tremendous resource, even today. I have it hanging in my house. Now, the next kind of source that's available are accounts of people who've been traveling around. Some of them are fictional, some of them are real, some of them are a combination of both of them, which I think are fictional and real. But anyway, so these are two of my favorites. Temagami Guide, Jack Hamilton. Is a novel of two teenagers paddling around Temagami. 59 was the second season I was up there, and our staffman read that to us at night, and we went everywhere these two kids went, and it was fantastic. Wonderful place. And of course, the classic of them all, in my humble opinion, greatest book on canoeing ever written is The Lonely Land by Sigurd Olsen, who happened to be a friend and correspondent of mine. It's an account of a trip down the Churchill. And more than that, though, it's a philosophy of wilderness travel. It's just absolutely brilliant and totally wonderful. Any of those things you can get a hold of. Meanwhile, there's millions of these accounts all over the place. Now you mix them, you mix the account with the technical guide that's out now. And here's the Canoeing the Churchill Practical Guide to the Voyager's Route. And that's true. That's a really good book, and I used it on my trip down the Churchill. I found it to be reasonably accurate. However, caveat emptor, buyer beware, and watch out for the speed zones and everything else. These books have error embedded in them. And the reason is that they're marking very small artifacts on a vast and changing landscape. So they're tremendously valuable, but it's grain of salt time, friends. And when you're out there, if you're depending on that, you're not traveling safely. Here's a Temagami version of it, the Hap Wilson Canoe Route, Temagami Canoe Route, and the Temagami Guidebook. Very nice. Here's a little self-promotion. Canoe Atlas a little north. Tom Terry and myself put this together. 56 annotated maps covering 1/10 of Canada, Lake Superior to Hudson Bay, Lake Winnipeg to James Bay. Now, there's no shortage of accounts in these areas. We got Eric Severide canoeing with the crew who did the Hayes and the Gods, which I've been on. It's a tremendous trip. And here's a collection of stories, fictional stories about a fictional town on the edge of the Little North. And it's a sympathetic portrayal of everyone you'll find up there, including the Nishwawbe, who I'll have more to say about later. So it's a wonderful collection, and certainly worth reading. However, it's not limited to Canada. And you people here's two coots in a canoe. You may have been on the Connecticut. These guys got in their boat up in Canada and paddled to Long Island Sound. And here's the Connecticut River Boating Guide. Happened to be written by a friend of mine. So all very nice. And the Great Glen is in Scotland with and that's between the uplands and the lowlands of Scotland. Wonderful place to paddle. And the accompanying hiking guide along the side, the trails and the roads and everything go right along it. I stayed in the B&B every night. I never seen worse weather in my life than in Scotland, although they claimed it was a wonderful summer. Once you get through those accounts, the next thing you'd want to see would be the regional series of maps, and they're all over the place. In this instance, here's Eastern Manitoba by Rael Berger, who lives just outside of Winnipeg in the Francophone community. And his maps are hanging in art galleries, which is where they should be. They're fantastic. They're strip maps of the rivers, and then he decorated them on the side. Terrific stuff. Here's a closer view of one of them. These regional collections are incredibly valuable. The final thing is the old-fashioned trip reports, which don't have any maps or graphics or anything in them. They just narrate the route. And they're all over the place in libraries and ministry offices, and canoe camps have them, private people have them. I have thousands of them at home, and they're certainly worth getting a hold of because they take it step by step. The final real piece of information are face-to-face conversations, and this is entirely dependent on the First Nations folks, and there'll be no canoe route information. Then there wouldn't be any canoe routes if it weren't for these folks. I have included in Norvell Morisseau's classic painting of Gathering Herbs with Grandfather. This is their land, they live on it. And they share the information generously and openly. It's a wonderful thing, considering how badly they've been treated. But nonetheless, won't happen. So I use First Nation informants all the time because that's the classic. From Sioux Lookout up to Bearskin on the Severn, and the red line over here on the map is what we didn't know. We met with people in the band office. They marked our maps. It's the area of high falls and big rapids and everything else. It was incredibly helpful. Here's the God's River route, the classic from Norway House. The blue we got from an outfitter in Thompson and the First Nations recreational group at God's Lake Narrows. They make that trip twice a year because there's family connections there. And then when we got to God's Lake Narrows, we were in the Healy Lodge, and they gave us some information. I think my write-up of the lower God's River is probably the best one there is around. But anyway, it was a big help coming over that way. And the last one is the granddaddy of them all. This is the Great Whale, which Bill talked about. From Berger all the way down to Keewaydin, there are many high falls and chasms and whatnot. I spent 4 months on the phone. This is before the internet, talking to people in Keewaydin, and I wouldn't have left on that trip. I traveled along with my wife. I wouldn't have left on it if I didn't have a detailed marking of the bypass routes along those, around those big falls and rapids. So that was incredibly helpful. Now, when you finally got all this stuff together, you can start ordering maps in and deciding how you're going to go. And this is only the beginning of the process, because once you paste the maps together, that begins the real review of what your travel is going to be like. And it's what I call the imitation game, or the what's it like game. And you got to decide what to do. Now, this is a crossover route from Mascanonge on the Chincoteague River over to the Sturgeon and then back up to Lake Temagami. And we have no shortage of information here. Ottertooth.com, fantastic website, high quality, high res maps, trip reports, Hap Wilson's book, everything else in the world you'd ever want. So no problem. So we're going to play the imitation game, okay? And so one of these little places here, moving up here towards Kelly Lake. And I looked at the map and, okay, there's no real points in the lake. There's no islands. The channels are narrow. There's a lot of swamp up here. There's no meander on the river, on the creek itself. And the satellite view over here shows that the wetlands close in and you're trying to get into Kelly Lake. That first part is going to be all swamp. That's the assessment. Slow going. And, you know, that's what it turns out to be, but that's the thing you're trying to do. Now, the satellite views or aerial photos are very helpful. I included another one, and this is from the Star River in far northern Manitoba, south of the Guides. I had no write-up, I had no informants, I had nothing. I only had this thing. And this is a thundering double falls and rapids here. And I looked at it and I found this little back channel going in here. I went in as far as I could, and then I snaked along the open bedrock and got through the thing. Over here on the other side is the how to find the mouth of the Manitou. It's coming down, and I found this is important. I just want to bring it to your attention. So there's a peninsula that marked the mouth. It's very thin, okay, and behind it is a contour line. So I figured I'm coming down the river, and I'm going to see through to the other side, and I'm going to see trees rising up behind on another shoreline. And that's exactly how we found the mouth of the river when we went down there. The trip note said the portage was found just inside the river mouth, which is here, but it could have been anywhere along there. And so it took a bit of thrashing until we found that. So this is the game that you play, and I do it hundreds, if not thousands of times if it's a long trip. So now you draw up your itinerary and you play the game and you decide what are you going to do and what's your traveling pace and your traveling style going to be, because it varies with your age and your strength and your companions and the route and everything else. And these are some of the ones that I've participated in during my paddling career. They worked or didn't work. First, there was a camp routine where you got up around 6 o'clock or 6:30, got on the river before 9, paddled till noon, took an hour off, paddled till 4:30 or 5, made camp. And the thing was to make miles, period, 20 miles a day, boom, 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 carry along. And it depended really on where you were going to go and where you were going to end. And I followed that religiously, and for the first 17 years that I was traveling, then I got on the trip and the routine didn't work. the longer we tried it, the further behind we fell, and with days and rations and everything else. And so we had to find a new way of traveling. And that meant getting up at green light, and we were loading the canoes when the sun came over the hill. And we were just traveling all day long. We took an hour off for lunch, and we kept on going, and we just traveled until it was starting to get dark, and we turned in the shore and made camp. Didn't matter where we were. And this is pretty liberating philosophy, actually. It focuses on movement, not on destination. Now, of course, in the 90s and into through the 90s and so on, I was traveling with my children, babes in arms and little kids, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. And so I had to find another way for doing that. I found the best thing was to get up a gray light, give everybody a snack in the tent. All the stuff had been packed up the night before, pack and load the canoe, go for an hour down, cook breakfast. One person's cooking, one person's playing with the kids. Load up, go on, stop, diaper stop, snack stop, go on, take another stop, diaper change, snack stop, go on, take a swim, go on, stop for lunch, another round of diaper changes and snacks. It's getting on dinner time, stop, make dinner, close up, go on, find a place to camp. Now, I was young and pretty strong in those days, but nonetheless, this is a very successful way. It turns out the kids loved it. They loved it. They absolutely loved it. My son would sit in the bow of the canoe and draw with finger paints all over the inside. So, and it was just fine. Now everyone goes, and now the last 15 years, between the ages of 60 and 75 and 78 now, I was traveling with an old guiding buddy of mine from Wobbin, where we both started. And I did some of my best traveling in that time. But you had to, it was moderate days, the tremendous routes we went on, all the guides. We did the Fond du Lac and, up near the Northwest Territories. But, we get up early, we go. Pete liked to cook breakfast, so he'd cook in the half light and the mosquitoes. We'd be on the road before 7. We'd stop for lunch around 11:30 or so, whenever that was. We'd go on and make camp in the middle of the afternoon. We'd switch bow and stern every day. And we never took any chances at all. Didn't take any wide crossings, paddle around the shores. Every rapid we looked over, you could either run it without any trouble or you had to do something else. And not only that, but I decided, I called in a plane on 2 occasions in the 15-year period, and they just hopped us over some of the worst, and we kept on going. So that was, that's another way of going about it. And most recently, I've been paddling with my daughter and her husband and her little boy, my grandson, and their limit was quite limited as to the time we lived on. And they could devote 7 days to it. They were driving back and forth from where they lived. And so I picked a 4 or 5 day trip. We could have done it in 4 days. We did it in 7 days. The idea was just to be together and enjoy the land, and that's what we did. So, and it worked just fine. And they really love the pace. They love the travel and everything else. So that's the story. Now, the learning continues every day when you finish the day's travel. And I then set out and do my drawings every day. So the idea is that you review what you went through and you put it down in any way. Now, this is an interesting piece of water here. This is the Albany as it exits Osnaburg Lake heading northeast. One of the big differences between traveling the Temagami country and up in the little north is that everything is movement up there. The water is moving all the time. And the land is burned. There's no question about it. And this is unbelievable navigational problem. And so I recorded it in the drawing there. Imagine you're sitting in your canoe and you got to thread your way through this island maze and end up all the way over into here. And that's how you get out of there. And I'm, you know, this is, you look on the map and you say, oh, there it is. But then it isn't there it is. I'm telling you, those islands are burned, the land is burned. And it's difficult to pick up the, you know, the height and whatnot. So, but it's a review of the travel conditions. So here's the Albany itself. Lots of it up there, a lot of sand and gravel, a lot of wetlands, and then islands in the river, as you can see on the map, create hundreds of shallows and stuff you have to work your way through. It's quite challenging. And recording that in the sketchbook is a way of, you know, kind of remembering what was going on. And the whole idea is to draw the events of the day and keep the record. Now, when the trip is over in the fall, I redraw everything and put it together in such a way that I have titles on every one of them. And again, it lets me reflect on the whole business. Now, this is the Severn on the main channel. I'll tell you, that's big water up there. Stay close to shore no matter what route you're taking. And just, you know, fascinating stuff. Again, a review. This was a review of the Gods, below Gods Lake. Thinking about it, drawing it out, thinking about the route, thinking about the current, thinking about where you're going to put your canoe all the time. And then I pay a lot of attention to the light that's up there. Yes, I mean, aesthetically, everyone has their light they like and so on. But for me, it keeps me in on the traveling conditions that are experienced in those areas. So they're my memories. And every sketch has a little bit of intelligence and then my trip stories as they go along. So the key here is that this notion of a continuing story about the trip from the time you first think about it till you finish it and review it during the summertime and during the fall is you're telling yourself the story all the time. And so what happens to me is that I'm out on the trip, I orient the map, I feel the wind and the light, listen to the sounds, look over the water, the current, the topography, and I begin on day one, hour one, moment one, to tell myself the story of the route as it unfolds. And that's my basis of safe travel. Thanks for the opportunity to tell the story.
Thank you, John. So now we're ready to open it up for questions. We haven't had a lot of stuff going in the chat, but if you've got a question you'd like to ask, just unmute yourself and Bill and John will be here for a while to answer them. All right, so Russell is asking, given modern canoes and layups, what would be the ideal boat available these days, especially on the Rupert trips?
I would say that John Berger's Novacraft is the ideal canoe. It's light, it's sturdy, and it carries a ton of stuff.
I agree.
Okay.
Prospector Novacraft, that's it.
Okay. John, what's your length? What's the length of your boat? I know do you take longer than 16? Do you take the 17 or 18?
15, 16, or 17.
Yeah. Okay.
The best is to, you know, if you're strong enough, take the biggest. Yeah, I have a diminishing strength issue. So I practice today up and around the neighborhood carrying that 16-footer, you know, tough stuff.
Okay. Richard Crawley asks, what was the reason for carrying a triple and quadruple load? I guess that's for you, Bill.
Well, the thing about carrying cedar canvas canoes is that they're buoyant and they carry a lot of gear, but now and again, they get in a tangle with a bunch of rocks. And sometimes when they get in a tangle with a bunch of rocks, you end up with extra loads because one of the canoes will have to be recovered at another date. And so, you know, we had extra loads because we were short a canoe.
Okay.
And actually, and we had an extra carrier as well. We had Matthew to come along, so we had a little extra food. So that's why our loads were a little funny that summer.
Okay.
Are we referring to 3 trips or 3 loads on 1 load? Is that, what are we referring to, actually?
So what we had done is left 2
I
of
was
the
thinking Fletcher was saying.
we had left a couple of the wannigans behind, because the soft loads would fit better in our cramped space. I don't know if anybody has been down the Martin River, but for a long time you could find 2 of my wannigans at the Martin River Falls portage, with all the canned food we'd left behind in them. And that wasn't because anybody was in any danger or we had left anybody had gotten hurt. We just had a tear in the canvas canoe. Usually you can fix a tear in the canvas canoe, but every once in a while the canvas canoe takes a little more damage than you can bring along.
Okay.
And so we'd had to put everything into softer packs so they could be carried. And so some people got extra softer packs. How's that, Robert?
And Bill, what would be the normal, kind of the average carry for someone not taking a canoe on a portage? Folks who are carrying the wannigans and the packs.
Yeah, so the way we would do it in an ideal universe is when we are full of food. So we've got about 3 weeks of food with us when we're fully loaded, and John will attest to this. John has carried more than we've carried because he's gone on some big trips with smaller crews. The person carrying the canoe is going to carry the canoe and a wannigan, and on top of that wannigan is likely going to be some sort of collapsible pack with extra food in it. So you press some sort of waterproof pack. So you really are carrying a wannigan and a half on that load. So everybody's carrying 2 loads across the portage, either the tent and the 2 bedrolls or the canoe, and everybody has their own wannigan that they're responsible for. And when we've got 3 weeks of food on board, everybody has on top of that some sort of duffel bag. Nowadays, usually a dry bag, like a Sea to Summit dry bag full of something like flour, sugar, something light, but something that can really fit into those bags. The ideal load there is to be the person carrying the freeze-dried peas in the Sea to Summit bag.
The emotional, it all depends on your age and your strength and your experience. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's I've known, from the time I was a teenager and through my 30s into my 40s, I could, carry 200 pounds or more. Yeah. Now I'm lucky if I can, get across with my day pack. I mean,
I can tell you that's not true. I've seen John portage through the streets of Portland with all of his gear. He doesn't take a break.
Well, the thing about planning, though, depending. I mean, Bill is more in tune with section guiding, but when you're planning your own trips, your family trips, or whatever it is, you try and plan the route. So maybe you get an outfit, pick up something along the way, or, I mean, when Peter and I traveled together, it was 12 days food in the food pack, the wannigan and the kitchen wannigan, and another 12 days somewhere else we were going to come in and get it. And so that was our, it was all part of it. It was all put together in a way so that you don't have to kill yourself,
Yeah. So, and when we did the Ontario trips, John, you'll remember that you were never more than a week out of a Cree village and a Hudson Bay post or a co-op store. And so you didn't have to carry 3 weeks of food with you. You could order ahead and have your food delivered to the co-op store or the Hudson Bay Company. And
I used to mail it in. I used to send it by mail.
Yeah. And so then you were a week to 10 days, and then the loads were far more reasonable. 3 weeks of food is an unreasonable amount of food. And when John and I were starting out, freeze-dried food was expensive and not as available as it is now. So, I mean, I don't know if John remembers, but sometimes my wannigan would have 2 layers of cans of Spam on the bottom. And just think about how silly it was that we were carrying canned meat around in the woods when nowadays we can carry freeze-dried food.
Well, summer I was 14, the wannigan I carried weighed 150 pounds. It was filled with sweetened condensed milk.
Yeah, we carried water with us. I know. Well, so they, and
That's
part of this is an answer to a question in the chat. You don't ever have to go with the wannigan. There are bare buckets that do really well, big blue buckets that fit in the canoe. I think that a dry bag does a great job. You can certainly fit out your gear like a hiker using a lot of freeze-dried food, and it doesn't have to weigh anything like the way we carry sometimes. That's what I would say.
Okay. Let's see. What do you think of solo wilderness trips and any special pointers for them? And that's from LeClaire.
Well, my view is there's only two measurements about a canoe trip. Do you have fun and are you safe? So, what to say? If you're going alone and that's what you want to do, then one would presume that you've built in all the defense and depth that's necessary. Otherwise, you won't be coming back from the trip.
Yeah.
I mean, I frankly don't like those kinds of trips, and I wouldn't go on them now at my age. But there are people who revel in that sort of stuff, and God bless them. And I think it's wonderful. But I think there's a special breed of traveler who understands their capability and the risk. So that's the story. That doesn't mean, most of my traveling has been with one other person, and that doesn't mean that you can't screw up. But you absolutely have to minimize that business all the time. That's why I tell the story from back in my house with my maps till the time I'm out there until the time the trip is over. And okay, I'm going up to that first point, the wind is coming in over here, I got to go this way and that way and so forth and so on. I mean, and that's the story. I don't know, the question you can't ever, there's certain places, for example, if you want my recommendation, don't paddle on Lake Winnipeg. It's a bad deal altogether. And I know people do this and that and the other thing. Forget it. Don't go that way. It's stupid. Okay. The storm will come up from anywhere. The lake is shallow. It's a killer. All right. Second, if you want to paddle on Lake Winnipeg, then you must be no more than a paddle's length off the shore. It means you're humping through shallows and your paddle scraping and all that stuff. But if you're not like that and it brings up, you'll probably die out there. So don't go there. If you want to go from Minneapolis up to York Factory, like the sort of coming of age trip is, go through the shield, hop over the rim sheds and end up that way. It's just, there's some risk it's not worth taking, but that's what I have to say.
Anyway, couple more in the queue.
So someone asked about the length. So the
right
canoes, the canoes that I paddle with are prospectors. They're built off of I always chase down someone who has an old chestnut canoe mold, and they're 17-foot prospectors. But there are lots of different kinds of cedar canvas canoes out there. Some of them have a shallower draft. Some of them have a bigger rocker, so they turn more comfortably in the wind. And I think my advice to you would be to take the shape of a canoe that you like and find someone who builds a cedar canvas canoe that way, because there are lots of builders out there.
And just for folks in general, if you're close enough in the area to swing by, we already have one, and we were about to add a second cedar canvas canoe to our demo fleet. And the reason we're doing that is because the one time I've been in one, you can tell they just paddle different. And so we thought it'd be great to give people an opportunity to swing by the shop and, see how it feels to be in one of those boats, because it really does have a different feel. So
after 25 years in cedar and canvas canoes. And when the ABS came out, I was happy to switch over.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much easier on rivers and stuff. And it's not good practice. I know that, and Tom would just blush at my statements, but if you ever do a sidewash, it's better to load your canoe on land than it is to put it in the water and try and hold that thing. So if you have an ABS canoe, you can load that son of a gun on the rocks or the boulders, shove it in and jump in. It's just safer. I mean, that's my view, and it's bad practice, okay? From the
John, John,
cedar
you can do it with a cedar canvas too. You just have to have a round rock.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. Another question, again from LeClaire. Have you ever used spray decks on your canoes?
I never have. And the reason is that that's a limit that I don't want to approach. Okay. I know my colleagues who grew up in the barren grounds. And again, it's personal taste. If I need to have a spray deck to run rapids, I think I'm in the wrong rapid. Okay. And I see those people up there, they got helmets on and all that kind of stuff. You know, I don't know, but I do know people who use them all the time. So
when we followed John down the Great Whale, the gentleman who marked our maps for us was from Quebec City, and he had done it in decked canoes. And it didn't take us very long to sort out that he was running things that we would never approach, because it takes a very short amount of time to walk around a rapids. It takes a long time to extricate yourself from an accident. Yeah. And so I would always walk around the rapids. And I have to be honest that some of the most beautiful spots I've ever found in the woods were in the ponds and streams on the Cree portage routes around gorges, and the small sort of unseen spots where we wandered around. So I would go with John on that one.
Well, on the other hand, I mean, sometimes it's cold, and having a spray cover keeps you warmer.
That's right.
Last summer, I pulled out a tarp that I had in one of my packs. My daughter was saying she was getting cold, so she was still paddling, and I gave her the tarp, and she wrapped herself up in the thing. So, you know, it's whatever. But again, it's taste and practice. I noticed Michael W. Berger had a question.
What's essentially his current question is, when you guys look back at your life on the water, what is your main takeaway that you'd like to pass on to others who may or may never take a stroke in the bush?
I'll let John have the last word on this. I will say that the takeaway I'd take is you should leave no stone unturned. That there are things that look exciting. There are things where the risk gives you a big thrill, but I think taking your time, being still and being present, and turning over each stone to see what you find as you wander around the corner is the lesson I learned by paddling an open canoe, the heavy way, as we wandered through. So don't leave the stones unturned. That's what I would say.
John?
Well, I spent my life following the canoe routes, and I'm hoping to still keep doing it, although I know my time is limited yet. I mean, I don't know. There's all kinds of philosophies and stuff like that. It's just something wonderful to do, and you can't do with it. I can't do without it. So no matter where you go, there you are. No matter how wet and cold you are, you're always warm and dry. Traveling weather, whether you travel in, whether you like it or not. I mean, I don't know. It's my lifetime. It's my life. It's my pastime. It's what I do. It's probably the only thing I'm really good at, even though I write books and have a PhD and run a technology company and this, that, and the other thing. But when I think about myself, I'm a paddler. That's it. I'd rather sit home and play the imitation game than watch a Super Bowl. I mean, it's just, I'd rather look at maps. I mean, that's what it is, you know?
Once you leave the road, you're there.
Yeah.
You're there until you catch your plane 6 weeks later, 7 weeks later.
Yeah.
There's nowhere else to go. That's where you are.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's a nice way to be. And I'm glad that people like John made it look so interesting that I got involved in it. That's all.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
All right. Anything else, anyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So I want to thank Bill and John. I think it was great. I know I kind of heard him a little bit before in the practice, but you pick up something new every time you hear it. And I think having a couple of guys with this level of experience available is just tremendous. So I really, really appreciate the presentations, and I hope everybody enjoyed them. Please feel free to send us feedback at whiterosecanoe@gmail.com. We'd love to get your input about other topics you might be interested in hearing about, because we can kind of reach out to folks. It's kind of surprising who walks in the shop. Folks, you wouldn't believe, it surprises you every day who you meet. In terms of what's coming up next, we have another of these on the 16th. We're going to be talking about picking canoes and paddles. In April, we're going to talk more about gear. So these are kind of things to think about as you're getting ready to go into the season. In May, we're going to have a Novacraft Day. The guys from Novacraft are going to come down. I've lining up a couple of folks to come in and speak about some hopefully interesting topics if I can pull them in. And one thing to pay attention to if you're thinking about a Novacraft canoe, the folks have said, if we don't have it in stock and we need to put in a special order and we get the order to them by the 1st of April, it will be on a truck that'll be here for demo day. So if you're thinking about Novacraft, check to see if we've got it here. And if we don't, we can put that order in for you. Another event, something that I really like to push, is the Maine Canoe Symposium in June. They've extended it back to 2 days. It's run by all volunteers. Most of them are registered and senior registered Maine guides. And it's a ton of fun for not only the adults, but also the kids. They run a special separate kids program. So with their own set of counselors, and they have mini canoes. We got run over one day by a bunch of 4- and 5-year-olds just paddling the heck out of these micro canoes and those kind of things. So it's really a lot of fun. You ought to look into it. Happy to provide you information, but you can just look for the Maine Canoe Symposium online as well. It's a great event. So that's what we've got coming up. And let's just move down one. And so we just want to thank you for coming and hope we see you again soon.